The shape of the hare. The lane was damp that morning, dark with the richness of last night's rain. A pale fog drifted over the hedgerows, softening the edges of the fields. Clara liked mornings like this, when the world seemed muted, slowed, and she could walk as though in a dream. Her boots pressed into the soft earth, leaving prints that would vanish by afternoon. A blackbird startled hysterically from the hawthorn as she passed. The air smelled of wet bark and moss, that old woodland scent that always made her think of childhood and of solitude. She was used to being alone. At 36, she had shaped her life to fit herself. The small cottage at the edge of the village, the work she could do from home, the steady rhythm of walking each morning and each evening. The silence was not oppressive. It was chosen. It was near the bend in the lane that she saw it. A shape, half hidden in the grass, darker than the soil. At first she thought it was nothing. A stone perhaps, a fallen branch. But then it moved. She knelt quickly, the damp seeping into her skirt, and found herself looking into the eyes of a hare. It was larger than a rabbit, its ears long and tipped with black. The fur along its flank was matted with blood, though the wound didn't look deep. The creature's breath came in sharp, shallow bursts, but it was the eyes that held her, wide, golden, with a depth she could not quite understand. They did not flinch from hers. She whispered. The hand hovered, unsure. Poor thing. The hare twitched, but did not flee. She had never held such a creature before. Rabbits, yes, as a child on the farm where she grew up. But a hare was different, wilder, more elusive. People said you almost never saw them close. Yet here it was, waiting, as if placed. She pulled her scarf from her neck, soft wool, and wrapped it carefully around the trembling body. The hare shuddered once, and she felt its heartbeat through the fabric. A rapid, frightened thrum, far faster than her own. It's all right, she said, as though words could reach across space between species. I'll take you home, just for a while. She rose, the bundle light in her arms, and began the slow walk back to her cottage. The fog thickened, curling around her as she walked, until the lane seemed to dissolve into whiteness. The hare shifted against her, and she felt the faint brush of whiskers on her neck. For a moment, she had the strange impression it was watching her, not simply with animal alertness, but with recognition. She shook the thought away. It was nothing, a fancy. But she held her bundle closer, shielding it from the chill. When she reached the cottage, she set the hare gently on the rug before the hearth. The fire was not yet lit, but the room seemed to warm anyway, simply from its presence. The hare lay still, eyes half closed, as though it trusted her. She watched it for a long while before finally stirring herself to fetch a bowl and a clean cloth to bathe the wound. As she worked, the hare's gaze never left her, and for the first time in months, maybe years, Clara felt as though she herself was being tended to. The cottage was small, but well kept. Its walls thick stone that held warmth. Clara had lived there alone for 5 years, and every chair, every cup, every picture on the wall felt entirely her own. Yet, with the hare on the hearth, the space felt altered, as though she were no longer the sole keeper of its silence. She boiled water, steeped herbs, and poured them into a chipped bowl with some salt. Kneeling, she dipped the cloth, wrung it out, and pressed it gently to the hare's side. The animal did not flinch. Its breath was fast but steady. And the wound, she saw it was not mortal, a shallow cut, perhaps from wire or a thorn. "You'll live," she murmured, dabbing with careful strokes. "Though you'll need time." The hare's golden eyes blinked slowly, almost like a nod. She laughed softly. "Talking to hares now, as if you could answer me." She kept speaking. The words rose unbidden, as though drawn out of her by the creature's stillness. She told it about her morning walks, the odd shape of clouds that day, the ache in her wrist from too much writing. She told it about the garden, how she meant to plant lavender this spring. The hare listened, or seemed to. Its gaze did not stray. By evening she had lit the fire, laid a quilt on the rug, and placed the hare upon it. She ate bread and cheese by the table, and every so often glanced at her guest. It was strange how easily the presence of another filled the cottage. She did not feel observed, more as though her smallest movements mattered. And she stood to clear her plate. The candles flickered, though there was no draught. She frowned, glanced at the window, shut it tight. The hare blinked, and the flame seemed to steady. Another night, the kettle began to whistle moments after she'd struck the match. She stared at it, unnerved, and glanced at the hare. It had shifted closer to the fire, ears twitching. "Coincidence," she whispered. But her heart beat faster. Days passed in this rhythm. She tended the wound each morning, dipping the cloth, smoothing the hare's fur. At first she touched only as necessity required. Later her hand lingered, moving in slow strokes down its back. The hare did not resist. Sometimes it leaned subtly into her hand, pressing warmth into her palm. She found herself noticing her own skin, the texture of her fingertips, the sensitivity along her forearms, the shiver that ran up her neck, and the hair shifted against her. She thought it must be simply tenderness, the way one might feel for any fragile thing. And yet, there was something more, an awareness that unsettled her. At night she dreamed. In one dream she ran through the fields barefoot, the grass brushing her ankles, the moon silver on her shoulders. She felt her body lighter, swifter, as though she too had long legs built for leaping. But when she looked beside her, another figure ran with her. Not a hare, but a woman, face veiled in shadow. The woman turned towards her with eyes as golden as embers. Clara woke with her pulse racing, her lips dry, body strangely alive with a feeling she could not name. The hare began to heal, its wound closed, the fur knitting back, though the scar remained faint beneath her touch. By then it had grown bolder, venturing beyond the hearth. She would find it in the kitchen, nosing towards the bread, or curled on a chair beside her bed. Sometimes she woke in the night to see it sitting on the sill, ears tall, eyes gleaming in the starlight. It was not a tame thing, she knew that, and yet its presence felt close, like companionship. One afternoon, as she peeled apples for a pie, she felt a weight against her calf. She looked down to see the hare pressing gently to her leg. Without thinking, she reached to stroke its head, her hand brushing along the curve of its ears, a warmth travelling up her, so sharp she drew her breath. "Strange creature," she whispered. The hare looked up, unblinking. That night, as the fire burned low, she sat cross-legged on the rug. The hare rested its head against her thigh. She let her hand move into its fur, slow and deliberate. The flicker of the flames painted the walls in shifting gold. The silence was deep, yet not empty. When she finally rose to go to bed, the hare followed her, and she did not send it away. The days slipped into a rhythm she had not planned, as though time itself had shifted to accommodate two lives instead of one. Morning came with the sound of small claws against the floorboards, the hare moving from hearth to door, as though measuring the world beyond, but choosing, for now, to remain. She rose earlier than she used to, stoked the fire, set bread to bake. The work felt lighter, touched by an invisible hand. Once she left a jug on the table overnight and returned to find it filled, beaded with moisture, as though it had stood outside in the cold. Another morning she found a vase of flowers on the sill, blooms she had not gathered, flowers not yet opened in the field. She told herself she must have forgotten, must have wandered in her sleep. Yet when she looked at the hare, she thought she saw amusement in its gaze, like the shadow of a smile. She began speaking more freely to it, telling stories from her childhood, how she'd once hidden in the barn rafters to escape chores, how she'd stolen plums from a neighbour's tree. Her voice softened as she spoke, and sometimes, as though in reply, the hare's ears would twitch, or it would stretch languidly, its body curving with a grace that held her attention. Evenings brought a familiar quiet she looked forward to more than ever. The hare would rest near her chair while she read, or settle by her bed at night. Once, half dreaming, she stretched out her hand and found its fur warm beneath her palm. She drifted back into sleep, and the dreams grew stranger. In one, she lay on the grass beneath a full moon. Her body was bare, the air cool, but the ground beneath her pulsed with warmth. A shadow leaned over her, the shape of a hare at first, then a woman, hair spilling across her shoulders, eyes gleaming gold. The woman bent close, her lips near enough that Clara felt the ghost of breath to her collarbone. She woke with the pulse thundering, her skin damp as though with dew. In the kitchen, she sometimes caught herself humming without knowing when she'd begun. Her movements grew unhurried, her senses sharpened. The scent of bread, the heat of the fire, the curve of her own arm as she reached for the kettle. She felt her body more, as if she'd lived half asleep before, and now moved. The hair too changed. Its wound healed fully, but it did not leave. It moved with quiet authority, claiming corners of the cottage, the rug, the windowsill. At times, it seemed almost guardian. She began to think of it less as an animal and more as someone, not in words, not in reason, but in the way her throat tightened and it turned its gaze upon her. One twilight, as rain fell against the windows, she sat on the rug by the fire, a hair curled beside her. She let her hand move through its fur, slower than before, each stroke deliberate. The softness gave way to a warmth. That warmth seemed to climb her arm, spreading into her chest. She caught herself breathing deeper. She stilled her hands, but the hair pressed against her thigh, insistent. Her heart fluttered. She moved herself, so close she could smell the earthiness of its fur, the faint sharpness of rain. A memory came unbidden. Her first kiss, awkward and tender. The same trembling in her, the same sense of something shifting beyond her control. She pulled back quickly, ashamed of the thought. "What am I doing?" she whispered. The hare only looked at her, unblinking. That night, she did not dream of running. She dreamt of sitting in her chair, but she was not alone. The woman with the golden eyes sat opposite her, their knees touching. The woman reached across the space between them, brushing Clara's hand, and the touch burned through her like fire. She woke with tears on her cheeks, though she could not say whether they were tears of sorrow or joy. She began to sense the inevitability of parting. Each morning she looked out at the fields greening with spring, and she knew the hare did not belong by her hearth. Yet the thought of letting it go filled her with dread, with a strange ache that hollowed her belly. She would kneel to feed it, to stroke its fur, and think, just one more day, one more night. But already she knew the bond they had was was not meant for walls. One dawn, as a soft mist rolled again across the lane, she stood by the door with the hare in her arms. It pressed close, warm against her, as though it could sense the choice in her. Her lips brushed its head. The fur was soft, damp with her breath. The sensation was so tender it made her body ache. And she thought, or felt rather, that she kissed not fur, but skin. She delayed as long as she could. For days she found reasons to keep the hare inside. The morning chill, the wind that snapped at the eaves, the way its flank still looked tender beneath her hand. But the season was turning. Snowdrops had risen, crocuses opened in the lanes. The hare smelled the thawing soil and distant rain. No wild thing could be kept from such a world. She knew it, and the knowing pressed on her until it almost hurt. One evening, as the light faded to amber, she lit no candles. She sat by the hearth, the hare resting at her feet, and she whispered, "Tomorrow." The word hung heavy in the air, though the hare gave no sign of hearing, and yet she felt its ears twitch, its body still against her toes, and she thought perhaps it did understand. That night she did not sleep. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the hare shifting and breathing by her bedside. Each sound carved itself into her. Each silence echoed. By dawn her lips were dry, her body restless, as though she had been waiting for years rather than hours. She rose before the sun had cleared the hedge. Wisps of mist lay across the fields, veiling the grass in silver. She wrapped herself in a coat, lifted the hare into her arms, and stepped outside. The air was damp and cool, carrying the scent of dew and turned earth. Birds stirred in the hedgerows, tentative with song. The hare was calm against her, its weight familiar now, the curve of its body fitting into her hold. She pressed it closer, her cheek brushing it. The fur was warm, and beneath it she felt the strong, steady beat of its heart. She walked through the meadow, boots soaking with wet grass, until she reached the rise where the view opened wide. The horizon stretched in soft folds, green and grey beneath the sky. Here she stopped. Her breath trembled. She lowered the hare gently to the ground. It sat, ears tall, golden eyes fixed on her. "This is where we part," she whispered. Words wavered. "You don't belong to me. You never did." Her throat tightened. She bent, gathering the hare once more into her arms. She hugged it as though she could press her life into it, as though holding it tighter might bend the world to her will. And then, without thought, she kissed it. The soft fur met her lips, carrying the faint scent of earth and wood smoke. For an instant, the world held still, the air thick around her, the skin alive with warmth. And then her arms were full of something else. Not fur, not trembling bone, but the shape of a person. She drew back in shock, though her hand did not let go. The figure she held was taller than she, slender, her hair dark and tumbling across her shoulders. A cloak of the hare's own brown fur seemed to cling to her skin, but beneath it, warmth, softness, the unmistakable form of flesh. The woman's eyes were aware, golden, unblinking, luminous with knowing. For a moment neither spoke. The air between them thrummed with silence, heavy, alive. The woman's breath touched her neck. Clara realised how close they were still, their bodies pressed together as though they had always belonged that way. Her lips tingled with the memory of the kiss, though it had been given to fur. The woman smiled faintly, the curve of her lips that held both gratitude and mischief. "You cared for me," she said, her voice low, smooth, as though shaped from wind and water. "You would have been so tender, so sensitive." Clara tried to answer, but her tongue felt thick. She could only nod. The witch, for that was what she must be, leaned closer, her forehead resting briefly against Clara's. The touch was tender, intimate, like the brush of breath in her dreams. And then, as swiftly as fog dissolves in sunlight, the woman pulled away. She stepped back, her form blurring at the edges, dissolving into the air. A hare stood once more in her place, poised, ears torn. It leapt, swift and graceful, across the grass, disappearing into the whiteness of the morning. Clara stood alone on the rise, her arms still tingling, her lips still burning, the ghost of the warmth. The meadow was empty, but it did not feel empty. She stood in the fog until the sun began to thin the whiteness, until birdsong filled the stillness around her, and the world resumed its steady rhythm. Her arms felt strangely heavy, her lips strangely alive, remembering the touch. When at last she turned back towards the cottage, each step felt weighted with silence. The path was familiar, but she walked it differently now, as though every stone, every turn of grass, shifted whilst she'd been away. The hearth was still warm when she returned. The quilt lay where she'd left it, marked faintly with the imprint of the hare's body. She stood over it for a long time, her hand hovering above the fabric.